If I were a rich man, all day long I'd be bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a rich man, I see my wife, my beauty.
When Jewish immigrant peddlers began selling their goods along the Wabash River and in Rising Sun, Indiana, whoever would have thought that these humble beginnings of trade would eventually lead to the department stores of Block's, Gimbel's, Wasson's, and Saks Fifth Avenue. Welcome to this edition of Hoosier History. I'm Rick Maultra. Jewish immigrants came to Indiana from many countries, and with them they brought a new hope for a better way of life that was free from religious and ethnic persecution. Jewish people are multinational and multicultural. They brought with them not only Jewish history and tradition to the United States, but varying religious practices and cultural attributes of their native country. For example, the first big wave of Jewish immigration came to the States in the 1830s from Germany. Those Jews were seeking economic betterment. Later, Jews left from Russia, Lithuania, Poland, and Austria due to anti-Semitic riots known as pogroms that resulted after Tsar Alexander II was assassinated. These pogroms caused a tremendous immigration of Jewish people to America around 1881. In addition, many men fled with their families from these areas because they had been drafted into the Russian army for service that could last as long as 25 years.
Well, I believe that my father's parents came from Russia because of the pogroms. The pogroms were when the Cossacks would come through the different villages and kill, or they would take some of the people away, or it was just unwanted killing.
These Jewish immigrants from Russia, Germany, and Eastern Europe were known as Ashkenazi Jews, and they spoke Yiddish, which is a mix of Hebrew and German. Sephardic Jews, on the other hand, were originally from Spain and were banished during the Spanish Inquisition. They ended up relocating primarily in Greece, Turkey, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Northern Africa. It is widely believed that Christopher Columbus was a Sephardic Jew, though Spain and Italy claim Columbus as one of their own as well. Most Sephardics are those that speak Ladino, which is a mix of Hebrew and Spanish. Since many Sephardic Jews ended up in the Balkan region, their culture went along with it. As a result, it is quite common for the Sephardics to prepare a lot of Greek dishes. The first Sephardic settlers to Indianapolis were Jacob and Rachel Toledano in 1906. They were from Monastir, Yugoslavia, as many other Sephardic immigrants to central Indiana were. Many of the Ashkenazi Jews did not recognize the Sephardim as Jews because they spoke Ladino and not Yiddish. Consequently, the Ashkenazim tended to look down their noses on the new Sephardic arrivals.
No, when they first came over, ironically, they weren't considered Jews because the other Ashkenazim weren't aware of Sephardic Jews. And they just couldn't believe that anybody that didn't speak Yiddish could be Jewish.
The first Jews to move into Indiana were fur traders and peddlers. Jewish traders were among the first settlers in such communities as Louisville, Detroit, and Green Bay. John Jacob Hayes was the first known Jew on record to arrive in Indiana. He came in the late 1700s. President James Madison appointed him Indian agent to the Potawatomi and Miami Indians.
The early Jews, or the first Jews, were peddlers, they were traders. They had a difficult life. They had no Jewish community life. But slowly, Jews started to come to this territory. It's interesting that by the year of 1800, there were only 2,000 Jews in America. By 1840, there were 15,000 Jews.
1816 saw the arrival of brothers Phineas and David Israel to Rising Sun, Indiana. They were traders along the White River and later resided in Connersville. In Muncie, the earliest Jews were from Bohemia. In 1849, 2 years after the first rail line to Indianapolis was completed, the first Jews arrived to the city. These early pioneers would include Alexander and Sarah Franco and Moses Wolfe. They were from Plymouth, England. During the early days of Jewish immigration to Indiana, it was not uncommon for Jews to intermarry with non-Jews. Indianapolis's first all-Jewish wedding took place in 1860, when Sarah Harris married Joseph Solomon. Many more weddings soon took place in Indianapolis as immigration to the city soared between 1830 and 1860. Most of the early Jewish immigrants were from the area of Germanic states in Europe, and they took exceptional pride in their German heritage and chose to maintain the German language once they came to Indiana. Orthodox Jews in the late 1800s were Russian, Polish, and Hungarian, and lived in crowded and impoverished areas on the south side of Indianapolis, according to a Hebrew-Russian paper, while the German Reformed Jews, on the other hand, lived in ivory towers in the northern part of the city. As with most other immigrant groups who arrived in Indianapolis, Jewish people settled the South Side first before reaching a level of prosperity and thereby moving to parts north in the city. As Jews began arriving on the South Side in the early 1850s and up to the turn of the century, the first order of business was to consecrate burial ground. It was a ritualistic tradition that the Jews brought with them from Europe. After that, a shul, or synagogue, was established to worship in. Many times, groups forming 10 people or more, which was called a minyan or prayer group, worshiped together at various homes until a synagogue could be established. That in itself could be the result of purchasing an established church and renovating it into a synagogue for that particular Jewish sect. Many people remember the good old days on the South Side when everyone knew everybody else in the neighborhood, that everyone knew the other's business. Days of outhouses in the back, of pumping water and kick the wicket on the dusty dirt streets of Maple and Eddy. The Jewish people looked out for one another in the old neighborhood, especially for the new immigrant arrivals.
The first thing the Jewish immigrants did, they went down on the South Side. They knew that's where the Jewish people were. And all the Jews who had been here maybe 5 years or 2 years, who were a little bit settled, always looked after the newcomers. There's that bond in Judaism, where one Jew will always look out after another one.
Most Jews, except for Sephardics, have no particular love or close ties for the old country from which they came, because of the persecution that they endured there. Their love now is for the state of Israel and the United States.
There's no connection at all between me as a person and Lithuania. In fact, if anything, the Lithuanians were worse than Hitler. In fact, when Hitler took over Lithuania, he used the Lithuanians in Russia to kill the Jews. They were such bastards.
Assisting in acclimation of newly arrived Jewish immigrants to Indianapolis was the Nathan Moore Settlement House. It also took care of the city's Jewish poor. The Settlement House was just another example of a long line of charitable organizations and facilities set up to assist the less fortunate in Jewish communities statewide. Originally intended to benefit Jewish immigrants for the most part, the benevolence of Jewish-formed charitable organizations spread to assist people of all ethnic origins. The National Council of Jewish Women is a perfect example. About the turn of the century, the Jewish Federation was formed. It assisted in feeding and housing transients, in locating husbands who had abandoned their wives, dispensing coal and groceries to those in need, and making small loans to immigrants who wanted to purchase a stand in the city market or a horse for peddling. The Jewish Federation served as an umbrella for several agencies under it that saw the Federation concentrate more on educational and cultural and recreational services for the Jewish community. Some of the Federation's more prominent leaders over the years include Sarah Goodman, who was the only woman president of the Federation to date. She was instrumental in organizing the Kirschbaum Orchestra, which eventually became the Indianapolis Symphony. Her husband, Jack Goodman, who was a co-founder of Real Silk Hosiery, also served as president of the Federation and of the Congregation of Beth El Zedek. Neighborhood activities, recreational centers, and social clubs kept Indiana's Jewish community active during leisure hours. Getting together for a game of cards was a popular evening activity, and on Sundays the men would get together to argue over the interpretation of the Talmud, a code of Jewish law.
They would really argue about that Talmud in its readings and its beliefs and how they interpreted. And they argued, no, it didn't mean that. And they would say, now look, now they go back again. And they start talking in their lingo and their talk and they argue it.
Who day and night must scramble for a living, feed a wife and children, say his daily prayers, and who has the right as master of the house to have the final word.
Old world traditions were a part of the Jewish way of life, and one way to sustain tradition was through maintaining the language once they got to America. Jewish schools were set up in Indiana before there was a public school system, and these were used to teach Jewish children the ways of culture and the religious faith, as well as to learn and speak Yiddish, which is the native tongue of the Ashkenazi Jews. Many children born to Jewish immigrants learned Yiddish before English.
So Papa's free to read the holy book. The mama. Tradition.
When I was brought into the house, brought up, we spoke Yiddish all the time. In the house, we spoke Yiddish. And then after we went to grade school, we started speaking English.
My mother spoke Yiddish. She spoke less English. I think it was a language that she wasn't as comfortable with. In other words, she spoke Yiddish to us and we spoke English to her. And when we were very, very little, they would try to speak Yiddish to each other, thinking we wouldn't understand, but they were wrong.
Who must know the way to make a proper home?
Traditionally, Sephardics differ from Ashkenazi Jews in that they will name their children after living grandparents or other relatives. Ashkenazi Jews steer clear of this practice. An old country custom for Jews is to provide food and house cleaning for those in mourning. Almost all Jewish people will recall fondly the tradition of lighting candles in their homes to welcome in the Sabbath, of going to temple and having a big Friday dinner that evening.
People today say to me, why do you light candles on every Friday night? That's the beginning of our Sabbath. Because my mother did it, and my grandmother did it, and my great-grandmother did it.
Another old custom is the celebration of a boy entering manhood when he turns 13. This service is known as a bar mitzvah. For a girl, the service is known as a bat mitzvah. Jewish holidays differ in meaning from those celebrated by Christians, though the dates they fall on are seasonally similar. Passover, which takes place around Easter, celebrates the escape of the Jews from the bondage of Egypt. Rosh Hashanah marks the beginning of the Jewish New Year. Yom Kippur is a day of repentance, a time when those of the Jewish faith ask God for the forgiveness of sins. And Hanukkah, which occurs near the time Christians celebrate Christmas, celebrates the rededication of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. The lighting of candles on Hanukkah is a reminder of the miracle of the tiny jug of oil that burned for 8 days and nights. As much as Jewish community centers like the Kirschbaum and communal buildings help fill pastime needs, the Jewish synagogue was the center of social life, as well as serving in its primary role of fulfilling spiritual needs. In central Indiana, the earliest of these temples was the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation, which was first organized in 1856. When the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation decided to build their first synagogue, they received donations from non-Jews. The establishing of Indianapolis's first Hebrew congregation had statewide ramifications. Membership to the IHC saw people travel to the city from Franklin, Kokomo, Knightstown, and Edinburgh. The first rabbi was S. Berman. Other IHC rabbis of note include Judah Wexler, Meyer Messing, and most notably Morris Forlicht, whose influence established almost every Jewish organization to aid Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. Forlicht drafted the bylaws and constitution of the Jewish Federation, and he helped the Sephardic Jews purchase their own cemetery and synagogue. The first permanent synagogue for the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation was completed in 1868 on Market Street. Later in 1899, the IHC built another synagogue at 10th and Delaware due to increasing membership. That facility later was home to what was then known as the People's Temple, headed by the Reverend Jim Jones, who eventually took his people to destruction in the Guyana tragedy. The IHC had long since vacated that temple at 10th and Delaware to their new home on North Meridian. The Shara Tefillah, first of the South Side shuls or synagogues, was established around 1870. It was Orthodox, with the congregation made up primarily of Polish Jews. Though organized much earlier, the congregation built its first temple in 1882 at 352 South Meridian. The congregation struggled in its early years just to survive, as it went through several rabbis. The Russian shul was Knesset Israel, founded in 1889, and its synagogue was completed in 1893 at the corner of Eddy and Merle Streets. For many years, the Shara Tefillah and Knesset Israel shared the same rabbis that included the well-revered Isaac Neustadt and Samuel Katz. The Hungarian Hebrew congregation Ohev Zedek was formed in 1884, and they worshipped in rented storefronts in the near downtown area. It was not until 1899 that they purchased the old IHC temple at the corner of Market and East, which was close to many of their homes. In 1913, the Sephardic Jews organized their own synagogue and eventually called it Etz Hayim, meaning Tree of Life. One of the first cantors there was Isaac Cohen. A cantor is a person who chants prayer in a song-like manner during the course of the service. For most of the synagogues, the cantor chants in Hebrew, except at Etz Hayim, where the chanting is done in both Hebrew and the Sephardic native tongue of Ladino. Rabbi Morris Forelicht of IHC was instrumental in helping secure the synagogue for the Sephardim. Rabbi Yahan was the first rabbi to occupy the Sephardic pulpit. An old world tradition of the Sephardic and Orthodox is that women would sit on one side of the aisle and the men on the other, a tradition that is still practiced today at Etz Hayim, which is now located on Hoover and 64th Street on Indianapolis's far north side, and at B'nai Torah and United Hebrew Orthodox. On the north side of Indianapolis, synagogues sprang up due to the fact that once Jews had prospered and left the south side, they lost the desire to attend the old country shul that they had left behind there. They wanted a different kind of worship service. The Central Hebrew Congregation was formed in 1923 on the north side. It eventually became B'nai Torah. Rabbi Nandor Fruchter was the driving force of the merger that sowed the birth for B'nai Torah as a temple at 65th and Hoover Road. In 1927, Congregation Beth-El merged with the Hungarian congregation Ohev Zedek, and the name was changed to Beth-El Zedek, with Milton Steinberg as its first rabbi. Steinberg modified the merged congregation from modern Orthodoxy to Reconstructionist Judaism. Beth-El Zedek became a center for Jewish nationalistic activity. Steinberg was such a respected influence that any modifications with the temple's philosophy are very much in keeping with Steinberg's beliefs. The word Holocaust is defined by the dictionary means a great destruction by fire. For over 6 million Jews that met death at the hands of Hitler and the Nazis during World War II. For Indiana's Holocaust survivors, it is a part of their lives that they can never forget, nor the family that they left behind who never made it to America.
The Holocaust, as most people know, was something tragic that happened during World War II when the Nazis wanted to eliminate everybody and everything that is Jewish. And it was restrictions one after the other. They collected our relatives, our friends, put them in cattle wagons. The cattle wagons were heading for Auschwitz and to the gas chambers and to the crematoria.
After the liberation, I went back home. I didn't believe that it could be such unhuman people to take innocent children, babies, and kill them. Who could believe that a thing like that can happen? And in 1944, I was deported with my wife and children, my in-laws. They put us in railroad cars, and we didn't know where they take us. My wife was 25 years old when we went to Auschwitz. I have never seen them anymore.
Probably the most significant and certainly most visible of all the contributions by Indiana's Jewish community would have to be in the world of business. Consider that Sachs Fifth Avenue blocks, Ellis, Strauss, and Wassons were the result of Indiana's Jewish immigrant community, and you get the idea. Jewish business in central Indiana prospered during the 1860s with the Civil War. Since the Jewish community made up 70% of the garment and tailoring business, they made many of the uniforms for the soldiers of the Union Army. Around the turn of the century, those Jews who were peddlers selling from carts in the rural areas of Indiana concentrated more on selling on the streets of the city. The hucksters who sold goods from horse and wagons traveled the streets of Indianapolis' south side and other cities in Indiana, their cries mingling in with those of junk dealers and ragmen. Other immigrants sold goods from stands of the city market. Their stock might have consisted of collar buttons, socks, suspenders, chewing gum, fruits and vegetables, and so on.
And I went to the city market to sell baskets, and I made good money there. Everything I made, I'd give to my mother.
The city market was the only game in town. People came from all over town to buy their groceries. They bought their fresh meats, their produce. They even bought chickens, live chickens, and then had them slaughtered and cleaned and took them home from the market.
Examples of Jewish retail business in Indiana include Adam Gimbel's dry goods store of 1842 in Vincennes. His sons went on to establish Sachs Fifth Avenue. Chaim Barrett started with a push cart that eventually was successful enough for him to establish the Ye Old Curiosity Shop. Later he had a hardware store. Sol Meyer and Sol Kaiser started the Meyer Kaiser Bank, which financed many important commercial buildings in Indianapolis. Kahn Tailoring was one of the largest manufacturers of men's suits and military uniforms in the country. A real friend to the Sephardic community, it employed nearly half of those residing in Indianapolis.
I went to Kahn's. I didn't have no education to the 3rd grade. They wouldn't hire me because I didn't have no birth certificate. So I was a pest. I said, I'm getting in. They got so tired of seeing this face, they finally hired me for $2 a week.
Leopold Strauss was a successful retail clothing merchant. He came to Indiana in 1865. He and William H. Block from Austria became 2 of Indianapolis's most successful retailers. In 1910, Block had built an 8-story building at Illinois Market, directly across from the interurban rail station, whose scores of trains dropped off Hoosiers from the countryside for a day's shopping. Another department store of note was the Fair Department Store, which was started in 1905 by Leo Traugott on West Washington. Shapiro's restaurant, still operating today, has been located at 808 South Meridian for almost 80 years. It was founded by Louis and Rose Shapiro, who came to Indiana from Odessa, Russia. The restaurant was more of a grocery store before it became the deli of today. Waiters were making more money than the owners, so the Shapiros decided to turn their operation into a cafeteria line. Louis Shapiro's father had been at one time the chief food purchasing agent for the Tsar of Russia. Louis eventually left the deli for his son Max to run, who turned it into a major business. Libby Fogel's parents started Kips at the city market in 1928. It eventually was renamed to Libby's Delicatessen after she took over the role of proprietor from her husband Dave. Gustav Ephraimson and Louis Wolfe began retail business in 1888 with the Star Store. Eventually, with the help of Gustav's brother Meyer and Louis's nephew Frank, they purchased the H.P. Wasson & Company, a leading department store. They maintained the company's tradition of high-quality fashionable goods and dressmaking. Gustav Ephraimson made many contributions to the early Jewish community. He took over as president of the Jewish Federation in 1905 and was instrumental in bringing the Lowe's movie theater chain to Indianapolis. He also served as president of the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation. Gustav Ephraimson also took over the operation of Real Silk Hosiery to turn it around when it was in debt. At one time, Indianapolis had 8 kosher butcher shops on the south side, but according to Reuben Reisberg, his butcher shop in Broad Ripple is the only one in the state that provides kosher food. Kosher means prepared according to Jewish law, which includes humane slaughter of the animal and not mixing milk and meat together when eating. The old Jewish tradition of keeping a kosher household appears to have faded over the years. Indiana's Jewish immigrants brought with them deep-rooted religious practices, a pride in culture and tradition that was as diversified as the many countries in which Jewish people are native to. More than any other reason, Jewish people came to America and Indiana to escape the persecution that had followed them in the old country. As much as African Americans, the Jewish people understand and appreciate the freedom they enjoy in America, the freedom to express themselves ethnically and religiously.
I was born a Jew. I suffered because I am a Jew. And when my time comes, I'm going to die a Jew.
Being multinational and multicultural, Jewish immigrants tended to bicker amongst each other in the early years. German with Sephardic, Pole with Hungarian. But as time has passed, so too has their animosity with each other. Today, the State of Israel unites the Jewish people with one homeland, and it solidifies their faith in the Jewish religion. For this edition of Hoosier History, I'm Rick Maultra.
Who day and night must scramble for a living, feed a wife and children, say his daily prayers, and who has the right as master of the house to have the final word at home. The Papa, tradition, the Papa, tradition. Who must know the way to make a proper home, a quiet home, a kosher home. Who must raise a family and run the home, so Papa's free to read the holy book. The Mama